Welcome to Her Success Matters, a podcast exploring how advisors can work together to build a pathway for women to succeed in financial services. I am your host, Kristin Hull, Chief Executive Officer of Investment News. This podcast will give you rare insider access to the top financial services executives who are taking action to break down the barriers for the next generation of female advisors. You will also hear from some amazing and inspiring women who have forged their own pathway to success. Welcome to Her Success Matters. For today's episode, we will be discussing the terms gender lens and racial equity investing. We will also learn how advisors can ensure their clients' assets are allocated to companies that make positive impacts. Joining us today is Kristin Hull, founder, CEO, and CIO of Nia Impact Capital. Nia Impact Capital is a woman-led impact firm investing in forward-thinking companies poised to play a key role in our transition to an inclusive, just, and sustainable economy. Today, Kristin will help us break down the ins and outs of navigating impact investing. Kristin, I'm so thrilled to have you join us today. Welcome to Her Success Matters.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here and excited to talk with you about all that we're up to.
Fantastic. Kristin, you have such an interesting background and a passion for impact investing in particular. So let's start off our discussion today telling our listeners about your background and your personal journey that led you to build the Nia Global Solutions portfolio.
Okay, well, thank you. You're right. I do not have the typical portfolio management background, and I got here from one particular thread that's been really strong in my life is really wanting to make a difference and just realizing that this is where I need to do it now. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got started. I really had first exposure to the financial industry when I was 14, and my dad started a trading firm in our garage, as one does in California. I had been talking puts, calls, pork bellies, futures, options, and commodities since a really early age. While I worked at that company, did some summers on the trading floor and sat on the investment committee, I also really wanted to make a difference. And so I led a dual life for a long time. All of my education was about classroom teaching and about systems change in education. I was a bilingual school teacher in my hometown of Oakland, California, and I started a charter school there. And it wasn't until we sold that company where I was able to step back and say, wow, what if I combined my two worlds? And how would the financial industry and how would all of our lives be different if women had more access to financial markets and if we had more transparent ways of bringing our values and really investing into the world that we want to see? Nia is from the Swahili. It means intention and purpose. Starting a firm and a portfolio that is really just baked with purpose, really empowering women and people of color to be able to invest according to their values and into the economy that they want to see.
As you were talking about growing up and you and your dad in the garage in a trading company in California, that is so cool. It really is just a neat experience. But I love that you tuned into the other part of your personality when it came to the teaching and the global wanting to do well and helping people. And I'm seeing that more and more with women. And I think that's what's so fascinating and interesting about these conversations, that really is the nature of a lot of women. I love that there are smart, amazing women like you who have that background, but then combine it with your wanting and willingness to do better. The translation of the Nia and intent and purpose, those are other words that have coming up over and over again. And I think 2020 has taught us a lot about that, the need to have intention and also purpose, right? Thank you for sharing that. So how does then the company screen companies to ensure that they are companies that focus on impact investing? What's that look like?
Thank you for asking that, because we do have quite a different process than what often we see in the public markets. Rather than screening, which is, a very classic SRI or socially responsible investing premise that started about, 25, 30 years ago, where you start with an index, say the S&P or the Russell 2,000, 3,000, and then start kind of screening out or picking out the bad players. We actually have a different approach where we start with our 6 solution themes. And I developed our solution themes really in response to what is needed for people and planet, not only to survive, but to thrive on this planet together. What will we need? Using a systems change approach, I looked at what is that going to take? So everything from sustainable and renewable energy to healthcare, and really looking at where are the areas we need to address, particularly when it comes to women and people of color and their health, and what are the diseases and the issues that are happening there, and then what will the market reward for. Similarly, sustainable transportation, both for our products, services, our goods, as well as our people, and what is that going to look like to move things around on this planet in a sustainable and cost-effective way. And then we're also looking at financial services and financial inclusion in particular. Once we have more people involved in our economy and more voices, we know that we're going to be more balanced and ready to go. Looking at financial inclusion as well. So really starting with our 6 solution themes, and then looking at companies and how are they baked with purpose, and how are they addressing these themes? So we don't start with an index, we start with our themes, and then we start looking at what are the products and services that are out there, and then which are the organizations, companies, be them private or public, that are working on these, who has the best IP, and who are the leaders in the solutions that we want to see. And so it's really a very thoughtful, both top-down and bottom-up process of selecting companies and placing them into the portfolio one by one.
Again, going back to what we've learned in 2020, which in many ways we want to put behind us, but the learnings are so important. And in particular, things like people of color were disproportionately impacted by coronavirus and are dying. It also really highlighted the wealth gap, right? Particularly for minorities and people of color and in other areas, and also their living environments, right? I think that as we go forward too in this next administration, there's going to be so much opportunity, and having companies like you that focus on this and is just going to be incredible. And I think there's a lot of growth coming in the future for this. So great that your team is sort of ahead of the curve on this. And let's talk a little bit about the terms you use. So we talked about gender lens and racial equity. So tell us from your perspective, what does that term mean? Because I don't think everyone is familiar with that.
Gender lens, when we're using it at Nia, what we're talking about is using that lens or that viewpoint in how we're making decisions. Gender used to be a neutral term that really meant everything across a spectrum. Now it's tending to mean women. How are we looking at our decisions on our portfolio structure as well as on our hiring practices, and how will they bring about balance? For us, as we look at our portfolio, again, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at products and services that are beneficial to women and girls. We're also looking at hiring as well as promotions and retention. So we're really looking at the top too to see who is on the board and is that board diverse, because the research says that diverse teams make better decisions up to about 80% of the time. So we really want to see really strong governance, and that gender lens can help in that way.
You know, it's interesting, and thank you for giving a really specific definition of that term, because I think there's been a lot of ambiguity and misunderstanding about that, because there was a time a few years ago where it just became this battle of the genders, if you will. And it's really about working collaboratively and working together, because to your point, the research suggests that we have better outcomes by doing so. Companies like yours that put practices in place to ensure governance on this will help guide and create the path forward and show other companies how this can be done and why it's important to have it done. So thank you for that. Also, you talk to your clients about how gender diversity can be measured and serve as a proxy for other avenues of diversity. Will you talk us through the strategy behind this process?
Sure, sure. And it's not a perfect science at this time. Sometimes there's an art. And as you mentioned, there's a push and a pull as well, as we are looking at how to construct a portfolio and then also how to really make a difference. And at Nia, we're looking to have win-win conversations with every company about how they are thinking about diversity and inclusion and equity issues. When we say gender lens being a proxy for others, when we can talk about women, we can also get a sense of how they are thinking about different groups and how the company is thinking about diversifying so that they're really maximizing their opportunities for being impactful and then also for being really insightful and then innovative. Because again, diverse groups can have more revenues coming from innovation.
Kristin, can you tell us some examples of campaigns your firm is working on to address the industry's gender bias?
Sure, sure. We're excited about that. So we really, when we go in thinking about the gender bias, we're really looking at racial equity as well. And we go as far as asking about all differences. When it comes to boards of directors in this country and abroad, they're actually quite old. While we haven't really narrowed down on age, that will be one of our campaigns as well. So at this time, it's really gender and racial equity. We're speaking to all of our companies about that. And then we're also asking for a diversity report. The companies are not already putting one out. We know that what gets measured matters and what matters gets measured. And so we are asking for a really strong diversity report. And once companies are putting that out, then there's an incentive on their part to improve their numbers. So if they're being transparent about their numbers, they're often willing to start improving them. So our campaign is to have all of our companies and the companies outside of the Nia portfolio all producing a really strong diversity report with specific goals and metrics. And then the other piece that we're really have strong voices about is ending forced or mandatory arbitration as a clause for employees. We've found, and the research has found, that it's highly associated with both sexual harassment and racial discrimination. When we're seeking to build a positive and inclusive company culture, and that's what we're looking for in the companies we invest into, we really want to see them examine their use of forced arbitration.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because we talk a lot about this both on the podcast and training within the industry and within our own company. I hadn't heard anyone talk specifically about that. So I love that. That's a great takeaway for our listeners as well, is to ensure that those types of clauses are reviewed and looked at, because you're right, that absolutely can create some bias there. You also wrote a guide to racial equity investing. So do you want to talk a little bit more about the guide and maybe some of the learnings from there?
I wrote that in May. I put it out in June. So right really at the height of how our country was looking at, thinking about, really doing a self-examination of where we stand on racial equity. And of course, I don't need to tell anybody on this call that we have a far way to go. What I think needed to be said at that time, and I would say we still can be working on this, is the investor voice. As investors and as advisors and managers, we can do so much in moving our economy and our society towards racial equity.
That's great. Thank you. Again, more fantastic learnings. And I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we've gone through our own challenges on this as an organization, and we're working hard to address it. But you're right. The term I like to use is metrics that matter. So we're putting metrics that matter into our business as well. And I think it's the way forward. It has to be, because the conversations are important, but it's the actions that are going to make the difference in the end. That's another great takeaway. So thank you for sharing that as well. And let's talk about advisors. So they have a key role in helping their clients to do well with their money. What are some tips for advisors struggling to have those conversations with their clients?
One thing that has come from the Racial Equity Guide, and then I just wrote a chapter in the Global
handbook for impact investing on gender lens investing. And these can be real great conversation starters about what can happen and how can advisors really be helpful in helping their clients address some of these issues and things that they care about, which of course, many of these can result in alpha because it's a different way of thinking about generating returns as well. And it's been, particularly for us at Nia, investing at the intersection of social justice and environmental sustainability has been a win. And advisors are really picking up on that. One of the things that I might let everyone know, because it's not a very well-known fact, is just how few women and people of color asset managers there are. So when advisors are choosing which asset managers to work with and which types of investment products, seeking diversity is one way to diversify the entire portfolio. As you all published earlier last year, just a little known fact, which is, I guess, valuable to repeat, is that firms owned by women and minorities together combined manage just 1.3% of the assets in our 70 trillion asset management industry. And so advisors can play a big role by seeking out those managers that are women and people of color.
You know, you're right. The numbers don't lie, right? And it's what's fascinating is we are getting more women entering the industry, but some of them don't stay, and we don't do a good enough job at welcoming in women and minorities or women of color to come into this. And that's part of the purpose too of this podcast and the series. And I have been introduced to so many amazing women. Recently, I had Danielle Burns of CIO, and one of our big focuses this year is to bring on more women of color in the industry and elevate their voices, and hopes to, the whole, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So the more we can see that there is opportunity for women and women of color in particular in this industry, I think we can do a better job. And also it's the same for clients, right? Because we're not going to attract those clients if they don't have someone they can talk to that they can relate to. So I think it's important efforts, and it's exciting to see that we together can make a difference. Talk about a little bit of what is the next thing on your research project. What are you working on, and what any new data could we look forward to, or would you like to share?
We are working on several different projects, and one we've done in the past and will continue to do is highlight our female CEOs. We're also this year really looking to highlight our female CFOs, and then we're also looking across as we encourage our companies to put out diversity reports, we're also encouraging them to really take this type of effort seriously. And so we are seeing chief diversity officers being hired and placed. And we're also seeing more boards have expertise in this area. So those are some of the things we'll be reporting out, is how companies are shifting to really incorporate what matters.
It's thank you for bringing that up specifically, because actually one of our big focuses here at Investment News, we also see that trend. And we have a brand called Diversity Q that's our sister brand in the UK, but we're launching a new brand called Chief Diversity Officer for this industry to help provide more information and training and to get more knowledge out to companies in the industry and what they can do. So that's great. Kristin, tell our listeners where they can find your work, how to follow you, how to follow Nia, and the great work your company is doing.
Oh, thank you so much. We are at Nia, and it's NIA, niaimpactcapital.com. And then we're also on Twitter and Instagram as well. And of course on LinkedIn.
Excellent. My final question that I ask to all my guests is, please tell our listeners in your words why you believe her success matters.
Sure. One other thing I forgot to mention that I write the Doula blog. That does come out every couple of weeks, sometimes really just about issues that are happening, particularly in impact investing.
Okay. And where can we find your blog?
At themoneydoula.org.
themoneydoula.org. Excellent. I'm going to sign up myself and start following the blog. So thank you for that tip.
And as far as her success, it absolutely matters. I would say it matters for the women, of course. It also matters for the men, and it matters for our economy. If we're going to have the balanced and inclusive and sustainable economy we need those voices at the table. So we need to see more women in decision-making places and at decision-making tables. I really, truly believe that we will all benefit.
You are a great testament and example of what you could do. So you're an inspiring woman who's had great success, and you've used your dual purpose and passions in life to create this amazing company that's doing a lot of good for the world. So for that, we all thank you, and you are paving the way forward for many women that will come into this industry.
No, I hope so. That is our goal. We have many lofty goals, and one of them is to change the face of finance.
Excellent. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, Kristin. So thanks so much for joining me. And for all our listeners, you can continue to follow us on our podcast at Her Success Matters on the Investment News site. So please do, or you can follow me at Christine A. Shaw on Twitter as well, or LinkedIn. So thanks so much and have an amazing day.
Thank you. And thanks for all of the work you're doing to highlight all of our work.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Her Success Matters. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available, and share this podcast with others that believe her success matters.
The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Investment News. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.